My name is Isabel. I'm sitting in my cozy yellow kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, and I'm reminded of that fateful night at the steakhouse. It was a moment that changed everything, a single sentence that shattered the illusion of a loving family. I was 29 when it happened. I'd just graduated from nursing school, a long and hard-fought journey that I'd accomplished while working full-time at a local hospital. My brother Ethan insisted we have a special dinner to celebrate. He was 32, a successful lawyer in the city, and he'd always been my biggest supporter. His wife, Lily, was kind and warm, and their 4-year-old daughter, Mia, was the light of my life. We gathered at a fancy steakhouse in town. I wore a simple black dress that I'd bought on sale, and I'd done my best to style my hair. As I walked into the restaurant, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I'd been hoping that this would be a chance for my family to finally see all that I'd achieved, to recognize the sacrifices I'd made. We were seated by the window, and the table was set with candles and fine china. The waiter brought bread, and Mia immediately stuffed a piece into her mouth, making us all laugh. For a moment, I thought, this is it. This is a normal, happy family. Then Ethan stood up to make a toast. He cleared his throat and held up his glass of wine. He looked at me with so much love and pride in his eyes, and his words brought tears to my eyes. To my sister, he said, the strongest person I know. You've held this family together through so much, putting yourself last so that we could all have a better life. I'm so incredibly proud of you. I was speechless. I just nodded and put my hand over my mouth to hold back the sobs. But then, my mother spoke. She didn't raise her voice, but her words were like a knife to my heart. Honestly, sometimes I wish she'd never been born, she said, her voice cold and flat. The room went silent. Ethan's glass froze in mid-air, Lily's mouth dropped open, and Mia just looked around, confused. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I stared at my mother, hoping that she would take it back, that it was just a cruel joke. But she just shrugged, as if it was nothing. I felt a heavy door close inside me. It was like all the love and hope I'd had for our family just vanished in an instant. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I looked at my mother and said, "You got your wish. From now on, live like I don't exist. Don't call me, don't write me, don't even think about me." I turned to Ethan and told him that I loved him and that I'd call him later. I bent down and kissed Mia on the head, breathing in her sweet smell. Then, I walked out of the restaurant, past the hostess stand, past the people waiting for a table, and into the night. As I sat in my car, the tears finally came. I cried for what felt like hours, my whole body shaking with pain. I couldn't believe that my own mother could say such a thing. I'd spent my whole life trying to make her proud, to be the perfect daughter, and this was how she repaid me. But looking back, it wasn't really a surprise. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. Our family lived in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street. It was a nice enough house, but it was always a struggle to make ends meet. My father was a hard-working mechanic, but he passed away when I was 20. It was a heart attack, just like that. He was gone, and our family was left in pieces. After my father's death, my mother changed. She became cold and distant, especially towards me. Ethan was her favorite, always had been. The photo albums were filled with pictures of him at Little League games, at school events, getting awards. I was just a blurry figure in the background, always in his shadow. My mother worked as a secretary at a local office, but her salary wasn't enough to cover all the bills. So, I dropped out of college and took a job at the hospital as a nursing assistant. I worked long hours, often pulling double shifts, to make sure that Ethan could stay in school and that we could keep the house. I never complained. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, my mother would finally see me, would finally appreciate all that I was doing. But she never did. She took my efforts for granted, never once saying thank you or showing any kind of affection. Over the next few years, I continued to work at the hospital and secretly finished my nursing degree online. It was a long and difficult journey, but I was determined. I knew that it was my ticket to a better life, a way to escape the pain and disappointment of my family. When I finally graduated, I was so excited. I'd passed the NCLEX on my first try, and I'd been offered a job at a hospital in Seattle. It was a great opportunity, with better pay and more opportunities for advancement. But I didn't tell anyone, not even Ethan. I wanted to wait until after the graduation dinner to share the news, hoping that it would be a happy moment for all of us. But that dinner turned out to be a disaster. Instead of celebration, it was a night of heartbreak and betrayal. After I left the restaurant, I drove home and packed 2 suitcases. I called my friend Ava, who worked with me at the hospital, and she let me stay at her place. The next morning, I called Ethan and told him what had happened. He was devastated. He said that he'd always known that our mother was unfair, but he'd never thought she'd be so cruel. He understood why I was leaving, and he promised to stay in touch. I'd been secretly saving money for the past 3 years. I'd opened a bank account in a different town, so my mother wouldn't be able to find it. Every 2 weeks, I'd deposit whatever I could spare after paying the bills. It wasn't much, but over time, it added up. By the night of the graduation dinner, I had almost $45,000 in the account. Ava drove me to Seattle the following weekend. We made a road trip out of it, listening to music and sharing stories. It was a much-needed distraction from the pain of leaving my family behind. When we arrived in Seattle, I rented a small apartment near the hospital. It was a simple place, but it was mine. I started my new job, and it was everything I'd hoped for. The hospital was big and busy, filled with people from all over the world. No one knew about my family or my past. I was just Isabel, the new nurse with a kind heart and a passion for helping others. Over the next few years, I built a new life for myself. I made friends with my coworkers, joined a book club, and even adopted a dog, a little terrier mix named Max. I got promoted to charge nurse, and I was finally making a good living. I also fell in love. His name was Jake, and he was a musician. He played the guitar in a local band, and he was the kindest, most gentle person I'd ever met. We got married in a small ceremony in the park, and it was the happiest day of my life. But even though I was happy, I couldn't forget about my family. I still thought about Ethan and Mia, and I missed them dearly. I would call Ethan every few months to catch up, and he would tell me how Mia was growing up. But I refused to have any contact with my mother. I'd forgiven her in my heart, but I knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were. About 4 years after I'd left, Ethan called me one day and told me that our mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. He said that it was progressing quickly, and that the doctors didn't give her much time. He didn't ask me to come home, but he thought I should know. I sat with that news for a long time. I talked to Jake, to Ava, and to my therapist. Everyone had different opinions. Jake said that I should do what felt right for me. Ava said that I owed her nothing. My therapist said that it was my decision, and that there was no right or wrong answer. In the end, I decided not to go. I knew that if I saw her, I would be transported back to that little girl who had always craved her mother's love and approval. And I'd worked too hard to become the person I was today. I'd built a life filled with love, friendship, and purpose, and I wasn't going to let the past destroy it. My mother passed away 2 years ago. Ethan called me to tell me the news. I was at work, and I stepped into the supply closet and cried for a few minutes. I wasn't crying because I missed her, but because of all the what-ifs. What if she'd been a different mother? What if she'd seen me for who I was? I went to the funeral, but only for Ethan's sake. I stood in the back of the church, wearing a black dress that I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I didn't cry, and I didn't speak. I just watched as the people who had known my mother said their goodbyes. After the funeral, Mia, who was now 10, came up to me and gave me a hug. She looked up at me with her big, brown eyes and said, "Aunt Isabel, I'm glad you're happy." It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. I tell this story sometimes, to my friends, to new nurses who are struggling with their families, to anyone who will listen. I want them to know that it's okay to leave, to build a life that makes you happy. You don't have to stay in a situation that hurts you, just because it's family. Love is a choice, and you deserve to be loved and respected. Looking back on that night at the steakhouse, I realized that it was a turning point in my life. It was the moment when I finally stood up for myself, when I decided that I was worth more than my mother's rejection. And while it was painful, it was also the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope and possibility.